So Andrew Carnegie, this fucking fathead, this fucking meathead piece of shit. He's like a big fucking industrialist, right, in the Gilded era. This would be the Scottish-American industrialist led the enormous expansion of the American steel industry. So you had Rockefeller, who was known for something, and then you had Carnegie, who was known for steel. They were known for like the exact opposite. Rockefeller was known for something else. Steel. What the fuck was he? J.P. Morgan was known for being a big-ass banker. Carnegie was known for steel. And then Rockefeller was known for... I don't know. Okay, so it doesn't matter. The point is he's an asshole. Okay, so he's an asshole. And fuck Andrew Carnegie. Right? Fat fucking face. Look at that big old fucking face. Right? Look at grinning. Balding and grinning. Nothing wrong with any of that stuff, but he's just an asshole, right? So when you look at this face, just think of the homestead strike, think of child labor, think of poor labor standards and conditionings, you know, exploiting poor fucking Americans so he could get fucking rich as shit. And every once in a while he'd give money back, right? They call him a philanthropist. He's a philanthropist. He's not an industrialist. But that would be, he was part of the Industrial Revolution, right? He was part of the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Now, in America, a lot of what America does is what Germany does, and the reason why is because the entire education system of America came from Germany. Prussia is what Germany used to be called, and so we have the Prussian education system. We have a Prussian industrial model of education, and the Prussians, after the Battle of Jena, Allerstedt. So this is the battle. After this battle had happened, they were crushed by the French and by Napoleon. And after they got crushed, they started fearing for the German nation and the German culture. And then after they got crushed, you're going to have Johann Fichte is going to have an address, 1806, to the German nation. And that's the same year that the Battle of Jena Allerstedt happens. And they actually, there's another article here that says the 1-2 punch, Battle of Jena's 1-2 punch, Battle of Jena's Napoleon's double knockout punch. Because not only are they going to knock out the Prussians, but they're also going to knock out the Holy Roman Empire. The Holy Roman Empire abdicates. So the inheritor of the so-called fucking Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Empire, which was really the German Empire, under the Catholic Church. Okay, so the Germans had been unified, but they've been unified under the Catholic Church, and that's the heart was in I think it was in Prague or Bohemia. It doesn't matter. What does matter is that they were able to manipulate lots of kings and lords and noblemen and people who actually had power. The priest and the Catholic Church was able to do that to where they were able to rule over an empire, you know, by themselves. But after 1806, that no longer was the case. Okay, so this is interesting here. Let's see. It says history.net. So on the night of November 5th, 1805, 2 men and a woman secretly entered the crypt of the church of the garrison at Potsdam near Berlin. Exactly midnight, the three joined hands over the coffin of Frederick II, King of Prussia, Frederick the Great, and swore to overthrow the monster, as they and many other Europeans called Napoleon Bonaparte, Emperor of the French. The monster. Oh, the fucking monster is going to fucking kill us all. Making the oath were Frederick William III, King of Prussia, his wife, Queen Louise von Mecklenburg-Strelitz. That's too many. So beautiful that a contemporary described her as an apparition from a fairy tale. Okay. And Tsar Alexander I of Russia. Within a month of their solemn agreement, however, that oath was in jeopardy. On December 2nd, 1805, Napoleon crushed a combined Austro-Russian army at Austerlitz, a victory that left him in control of most of Western Europe. The Austrians were forced to sign the humiliating peace treaty of Pressburg, and Alexander's Russian army had to retreat homeward, technically still at war with France, but defeated and exhausted. But where were the Prussians? And where is Gorgito? Okay, so where are the Prussians? Despite Frederick William's assurance of support, the pace of events had moved too fast. By the time the king's foreign minister, Christian Graf von Haugwitz, managed to meet with Napoleon. The French emperor had already destroyed the Austro-Russian armies. Instead of delivering an ultimatum, Haugwitz abruptly reversed his stance, offered his warmest congratulations, and agreed to a treaty with France. Under its terms, Prussia ceded the principalities of Ansbach, Cleve, Neufchâtel, and Wesel to France. In return, Prussia received the right to occupy the Kingdom of Hanover, then the property of George III, King of Britain. When word of Frederick William's duplicity became public, Britain promptly declared war on Prussia. So, okay, wow. So, Prussia is making deals with fucking Napoleon, and that pisses off the fucking British, and so they attack Prussia. So, for Prussia, worse was the follow. On July 17th, 1806, Napoleon concluded the Treaty of the Confederation of the Rhine. 15 German rulers, sniffing the prevailing wind, agreed to secede from the Holy Roman Empire and the protection of defeated Emperor Francis II of Austria and become members of the Confederation of the Rhine under Napoleon's protection. The 15 pledged to shelter French troops and raise contingents of soldiers to aid them in any war they might fight. So that's fascinating right there, right? So you actually have 15 fucking states, German-speaking states, right, of the Prussians that's actually siding with Napoleon, sold the fucking, you know, the whole state out, or all the other fucking German-speaking people out, and they said that they would help fucking Napoleon, right? They would help quarter his troops. Frederick William now feared war with France and tried to forestall pressure from the growing war party in his government, one of whose leaders was Queen Louise. When Napoleon offered to return Hanover to George III in exchange for peace with Britain, however, the Prussian king was furious. He wrote to Tsar Alexander on August 9th, if Napoleon is treating with London about Hanover, he will destroy me. The Prussians secretly started preparing for war with France. Frederick William began to seek allies. A flurry of new treaties with Russia, still eager to overthrow Napoleon, and an agreement with England led to the formation of a new coalition, the Fourth, against France. Supremely confident of victory, the Prussians bragged that clubs would be all they needed to thrash Napoleon's French cobblers. Berliners cheered wildly when Queen Louise, wearing a crimson and blue colonel's uniform, paraded before the regiment of dragoons that bore her name. French Lieutenant Jean-Baptiste Antoine Marcellin de Marbat, then in Berlin as an envoy to the Prussian government, recalled, the officers whom I knew venture no longer to speak to me or salute me. Many Frenchmen were insulted by the populace. The men at arms of the noble guard pushed their swagger to the point of whetting their sword blades on the stone steps of the French ambassador's house. October 7th, 1806, Frederick William sent an insulting ultimatum to Napoleon, giving the emperor just 2 weeks to remove all French soldiers east of the Rhine and demanding that France give up all territory acquired since 1794. To knowledgeable observers, Prussian confidence was out of place. As early as 1789, a French politician noted the Prussian monarchy is so constituted that it cannot cope with calamity. The much vaunted Prussian army of Frederick the Great had rested on its laurels and lacked recent experience in combat. In peacetime, there is scant provision for large units to exercise together. In time of war, brigades and divisions were organized ad hoc, leaving commanders little time to train or get to know their units. There is no army reserves of artillery or cavalry, or more important, any staff organization worthy of the name. Most of these problems stem from the fact that the officer corps was old and hidebound. Many of the Prussia's highest ranking officers had been junior officers during the 7 Years' War. By 1806, of 142 generals, 4 were over 80 years of age, 13 over 79, 62 over 60, and 25% of the regimental and battalion commanders were over 60 years old. The Prussian mobilization was disorderly and incomplete. Young Captain Karl Maria von Clausewitz wrote that the Prussian army had 210,000 men, but such large detachments were held back in Poland and Silesia that the actual number of men available to face Napoleon was not more than 110,000. To compound the army's problems, the king divided his army into 3 commands. The first, 60,000 men, was commanded by 71-year-old Duke Karl of Brunswick, nephew and pupil of Frederick the Great. The second, 22,000 men, was under 60-year-old Frederick Ludwig. Okay, this is too much. But the point is, the Battle of Jena fucking embarrasses the Prussians, and then you have this man coming up here, Johann Gottlieb Fichte. Okay, Fichte is going to be the man that says that you have to fashion the students to will basically the same things you want them to will. So they'll want to be obedient to the king. They'll want to be, you know, however you want to brainwash them, right? So all about indoctrination. So after the Prussians are defeated by Napoleon, immediately the fucking Germans are scared to death, right? They're shit. We're going to lose our entire fucking nation, and our culture is going to turn into French. So what are we going to do? And so they said, fuck it. Immediately, we need a good education system, and we need to get everybody up to a certain level. So let's get compulsory, mandatory education and get everybody literate, right? So everybody can read and everybody knew the basics. But then they started organizing the shit. They wanted a part of the population to be the elites, the owners, the captains of industry, and they could control the rest of them. Then they wanted the architects and the they wanted the doctors and the lawyers and all the, you know, sort of the middle class type of citizenry. So there's 5% there, and then they had the rest of the people, right? So the majority of the people was going to be the dumb fucking serfs, the peasants, the slaves, the ones with the basic fucking knowledge who's going to be working for all the, you know, for the top 5%. So 1806, you got the Battle of Jena, right? Battle of Jena, the twin battles of Jena and Austerstedt. October 1806 on the plateau west of the River Saale in today's Germany between the forces of Napoleon I of France and Frederick William III of Prussia. And is this Frederick III? No. This is Frederick II. This is Frederick II. Did I say that? Frederick William II. This fat, chubby motherfucker. I had him pulled up for some reason, but Frederick William III of Prussia. Alright, so this guy is the one that's battling, right? He's on his horse, right? So he's on a horse, so clearly he knows what's going on. But he's the one that's going to lose in 1806. So maybe we should have gone with the fat guy, right? He's got blue eyes, chubby cheeks and shit. He's just got this little colorful hat and can ride a horse. I don't know. Judging by the pictures, I can't really tell. I cannot tell. So the numbers were about even, right? 122,000 French troops, 114,000 Prussians and Saxons at Jena and Austerlitz. So that's, you know, Napoleon smashed the outdated Prussian army inherited from Frederick II the Great, which resulted in the reduction of Prussia to half of its former size at the Treaty of Tilsit in July 1807. So what did Johann Fichte say? So let's read what Johann Gottlieb Fichte said to the German nation. So he's all fucking worried. He's all scared about, you know, losing this country. Like Glenn Beck, I just fear for my country. I just don't know what to do. The first, original, and truly natural boundaries of states are beyond doubt their internal boundaries. Those who speak the same language are joined to each other by a multitude of invisible bonds by nature herself long before any human art begins. They understand each other and have the power of continuing to make themselves understood more and more clearly. They belong together and by nature one in an inseparable whole. Such a whole, if it wishes to absorb and mingle with itself, any other people of different descent and language cannot do so without itself becoming confused, in the beginning at any rate, and violently disturbing the even progress of its culture. From this internal boundary, which is drawn by the spiritual nature of man himself, the marking of the external boundary by dwelling place results as a consequence. So he's sitting there saying that the true boundaries are the internal boundaries inside our souls. That's where we are, right? Who we all are is inside our souls. So people's like, oh, fuck German Americans. You're either goddamned American or you're not. Well, I think we need to be German Americans, African Americans, Mexican Americans. I think that makes us more cultural and gooder, right? It makes us gooder. And, you know, the Native Americans, they were here first. Also South America, right? Both continents are fucking America. So, okay. Let's continue going on by what it is. Johann Fichte. He's a nationalist, right? German nationalist. He's talking about how great language is. When I think about English, I think about Great Britain, right? And then I think about sort of Ebonics, and then I think about how hillbillies talk. And There's very huge different dialects when it comes to English, but we all have a common bond because we do speak English. Sort of, maybe, I don't know. Yeah, we're all English speaking peoples, right? So maybe England, that's how England won, right? England, the British Empire, the Prussians. It's like we took all the Roman Empire, we took all these fucking, okay. So they belong by together and they are one inseparable whole. Such a whole absorbed mingle itself, blah, blah, blah. From this internal boundary, which is drawn by the spiritual nature of man himself. The marking of external boundary, as a consequence, in the natural view of things, it is not because men dwell between certain mountains and rivers that they are a people, but on the contrary, men dwell together, and if their luck has so arranged it, are protected by rivers and mountains, because they were a people already by a law of nature which is much higher. I don't know if I believe any of that. A lot of times, actually, the people, names come from a plot of ground. The group servers were from the group server farm. Dayton was a moat, right? So if anybody was named Dayton or any variation of Dayton's, so a lot of the names originated from a piece of ground or some sort of land. Hegemon, Barney, group server, I don't know. So carrying on. Thus was the German nation placed sufficiently united with itself by a common language and a common way of thinking, and sharply enough severed from the other peoples in the middle of Europe as a wall to divide races not akin. That things should remain thus did not suit the selfishness of foreign countries whose calculations did not look more than one moment ahead. They found German bravery useful in waging their wars, and German hands useful to snatch the booty from their rivals. A means had to be found to attain this end, and foreign cunning won an easy victory over German ingenuousness and lack of suspicion. It was foreign countries which first made use the division of mind produced by religious disputes in Germany. Germany, which presented on a small scale the free features of Christian Europe as a whole, foreign countries, I say, made use of these disputes to break up the close inner unity of Germany into separate and disconnected parts. They knew how to present each of these separate states that had thus arisen in the lap of the one nation, which had no enemy except these foreign countries themselves, and no concern except the common one of setting itself with united strength against their seductive craft. A state must be perpetually on its guard. On the other hand, they knew how to make themselves appear to the German states as natural allies against the danger threatening them from their own countrymen, as allies with whom alone they would themselves stand or fall, and whose enterprises they must in turn support with all their might. It was only because of this artificial bond that all the disputes which might arise about any man or whatever in the old world or the new became disputes of the German races and their relation to each other. Every war, no matter what its cause, had to be fought out on German soil with German blood. Every disturbance on the balance had to be adjusted in that nation to which the whole fountainhead of such relationships were unknown, and the German states, whose separate existence was in itself contrary to all nature and reason, were compelled, in order that they might count for something, to act as make weights to the chief forces in the scale of the European equilibrium, whose movement they followed blindly without any will of their own. Just as in many states abroad the citizens are designated as belonging to this or that foreign party, or voting for this or that foreign alliance, but no name is found for those who belong to the party of their own country, so it was with the Germans. For long enough they belonged only to some foreign party or other, and one seldom came across a man who supported the party of the Germans and was of the opinion that this country ought to make an alliance with itself. Now at last let us be bold enough to look at the deceptive vision of a universal monarchy, which people are beginning to hold up for public veneration in place of that equilibrium which for some time has been growing more and more preposterous. And let us perceive how hateful and contrary to reason that vision is. Spiritual nature was able to present the essence of humanity in extremely diverse gradations and individuals and individuality as a whole in peoples. Only when each people lent to itself develops and forms itself in accordance with its own peculiar quality, and only when every people, each individual, develops himself in accordance with that common quality as well as in accordance with his own peculiar quality, then and then only does the manifestation of divinity appear in its true mirror as it ought to be. And only a man who either entirely lacks the notion of the rule of law and divine order, or else is an obdurate enemy there too could take upon himself to want to interfere with that law, which is the highest law in the spiritual world. Only the invisible qualities of nations are hidden. Okay. So that went on way too long. Sorry about that. To the German nation, 1807, he kept on going. Love that is truly love and not mere transitory lust never clings to what is transient. Only in the eternal does it awaken and become kindled. And there alone does it rest. Man is not above to love even himself unless he conceives himself as eternal. Apart from that, he cannot even respect, much less approve of himself. Still less can he love anything outside. This motherfucker's confusing. He's all over the place. So Johann Fichte is actually going to be the asshole that's going to say that you got to condition the fucking child. But this is the thoughts that they're having, right? So you have the Battle of Jena. You got the French and Napoleon who conquer Prussia, smash this Prussian army and the military that they thought was so fucking great, right? That had allowed them to exist and be strong for how many years? They also ended the Holy Roman Empire, right? 1806, Napoleon ends pretty much Prussia and the Holy Roman Empire, crushes them, right? That's the double knockout punch. Knocked out Prussia, knocked out the Holy Roman Empire. And after that was done, then he had, a lot of the Prussian states were become Napoleon French states, and they would supply shit to Napoleon. You had Johann Fichte that happened right after this, right? So 1806, you got the Battle of Jena, and then you got 1806 and 1807, the German address to the German nation, right? The address to the German. And Johann Fichte is basically saying, Germanism, we're Germans, what the fuck are we doing? Why are we letting foreign countries occupy us when we're all fucking Germans? We've been Germans a long ass time. Why can't we all just fucking unite? Let's all just be one culture, one people. And they basically made the argument that they've been one people the whole time. It's not just a common, in the beginning he was kind of saying language was a big thing with the German language, but he was saying sort of their whole culture. So their entire way of life, I guess how they organize their tribal, I don't know what culture he's talking about, but I mean, language is where culture comes from. So, if you share that similar language, then culture can flourish from it. So I do understand that in general, what he's talking about. So, he's afraid of losing the German nation. He's afraid of losing the German countries. If Napoleon comes in and wipes everybody out, then everybody becomes French. And so what happens to the German, culture and the German language and the German peoples? They get wiped out. Nobody ever talks about them ever again because now they're the fucking French, right? So that's Johann Fichte. He's fucking scared to death, and he wants to save the German people. And the way he wants to save the German people, through an education system of mandatory, compulsory education, get everybody into the fucking schools, make them obedient, make them listen to their fucking commanders, and when the commander tells them to go fight, they go fight and die, right? And we're like fucking dumb fucks. But we have to condition these people right from the get-go, right from the beginning. As soon as they're born, you got to rip the kids away from the parents, put them in the schools, make them obedient to the teacher, just how they're going to be obedient to the general, or just how they're going to be obedient to the boss. So you want an entire nation of obedient people, not all of them obedient, right? Save about 0.5% or 5% to do the big jobs, the big important jobs that's going to make them a lot of money. But once you got that 5 to 6%, of the population educated, then you got 94% of an obedient population ready to do your bidding and conform to your will. So that's the situation we're faced with. Okay, that's where we're at right now. And that's the Prussian model. Okay, so that's where the Prussian model comes from. They come from the education system, a compulsory education system that they want to compete against Napoleon. And then the Prussians, because they started this mandatory education system, they became good at it. They started to become, more sophisticated with how they did things and how they structured their educational programs. Now it says that there's 5 key goals in mind. It's obedient workers for the mines, obedient soldiers for the armies, well-subordinated civil servants to the government, well-subordinated clerks to industry, citizens who thought alike about major issues. So tyrants like Prussia's Frederick William I and France's Napoleon used this system to build a powerful controlling state apparatus, and then other despots followed in their footsteps. A small number of passionate ideological leaders visited Prussia in the first half of the 19th century, fell in love with the order, obedience, and efficiency of its educational system, and campaigned relentlessly thereafter to bring the Prussian vision to our shores. To do that, children would have to be removed from their parents and inappropriate cultural influences. So that's not exactly. I mean, they got to be ripped from their parents, and who's to say what's appropriate, not appropriate? So people like being American and love the state or whatever, you know, fight for your country, support the troops, and to be good workers. So I'm not sure about the inappropriate culture influences. Yeah, fuck the obedience. I do agree with that, but it seems to suggest something else. So let's say a small number of passionate ideological leaders visited Prussia. So that's Horace Mann and the rest, right? The next step was to sell the new system to the American public in the name of equality by convincing each respective state to adopt a compulsory government school system to ensure uniform education for the masses. The primary goals of this system were not intellectual training, but rather conditioning the students for obedience, subordination, and a collective life. With this bit of historical perspective regarding the origins and stated intentions of public education, it's much easier to understand why a free education for all children in public schools was a key plank of Marx's Communist Manifesto. So free education for all students in public schools is Marxism. So you're going to talk about Marxism and socialism. Is Mitch McConnell's he saying that we need to dismantle our public schools? Because I agree with the idea of universal schools. I don't agree with the totalitarianism of them. Instead of having totalitarianism, we actually do need free education and freedom. You know, public schools that value freedom. To this day, the defenders of the state-sponsored education insist that it was implemented at the request of the American people, but this isn't even the case either. Many of us grow up believing that the government reflects the will of the people, but skeptics know better. Government has assumed more and more control over private life, not because the people demanded it, but because power seekers and privilege seekers sought outlets for their ambitions. Napoleon, Prussia, and the U.S. education system. Let's see, let's go with this one. All right. So he brought the German system in and set the purpose of the schools to alienate children from parental influence and that of religion. He preached this openly, began creating school staff and programs that were immediately picked up by the new teacher colleges. Many of them were underwritten by the Rockefeller, the Carnegies, the Whitneys, and the Peabody family. So that's fucking huge. That's major. The teacher training schools, the normal schools that teach blind obedience and hierarchy, they were underwritten by the Rockefeller, Carnegies, Whitneys, and the Peabody family. The University of Chicago, right? Chicago University was underwritten by the Rockefellers. The fucking Rockefellers. So these are, you know, industrialists. These are fucking the big barons of the late 19th century. So university, right? The whole fucking university was written by these fucking industrialists. So industrial model education, Prussian industrial, yes, of course. So there's the educational system expands. So the wave of immigration, which began in 1848, combined with the visibility of revolutions taking place all over Europe, helped foster uncertainty in the public mind. Laws requiring compulsory schooling were then legislated. It was all very Hegelian. We wouldn't want those little tykes to become reactionaries, would we? In 1890, Carnegie wrote a series of essays called The Gospel of Wrath, in which he claimed that the capitalistic free enterprise system was dead in the United States. So fucking Carnegie, you know, making money from the free capitalist system, he says it's fucking dead. But it was dead because he was a monopoly. There was no fucking capitalism. He was a monopoly. He didn't believe in real capitalism. So this guy, what a fucking hypocrite. What an ironic fucking hypocrite, right? Making $1 million off the capitalistic system, saying that there's no capitalist system, that it's fucking broke, and yet he's a billionaire and giving out fucking, you know, he's a philanthropist, right? He's not an industrialist, he's a philanthropist. So since Carnegie, Rockefeller, and Morgan by then owned the United States, it was about 1917 a Great Red Scare was instituted in the United States in order to set up a reactionary movement intended to get the public to accept the idea of compulsory schooling. Prussian compulsory schooling. Compulsory. The implementation of the German education nightmare in the United States met some initial resistance. In Carnegie's hometown of Gary, Indiana, the system was implemented between 1910 and 1916. mostly through the efforts of William Wirt, the school superintendent. It involved no academic endeavor whatsoever. It worked so well in supplying willing workers for the steel mills that it was decided by Carnegie to bring the system to New York City. In 1917, they initiated a program in New York in 12 schools with the objective of enlarging the program to encompass 100 schools and eventually all the schools in New York. William Wirt came to supervise that transition. Unfortunately for Carnegie, the population of the 12 schools was predominantly composed of Jewish immigrants who innately recognized what was being done and the nature of the new educational system. 3 weeks of riots followed, and the editorials in the New York Times were very critical of the plan. Over 200 Jewish school children were thrown in jail. The whole political structure of New York that had tried this scheme were then thrown out of office during the next election. A book describing this scenario, The Great School Wars, was written by Diane Ravitch on the subject. Curiously, William Wirt was committed to an insane asylum around 1930 after going around making public speeches about his part in a large conspiracy to bring about a controlled state in the hands of certain people, and he died 2 years later. In order to make sure that the independence of the one-room schoolhouse and the penchant for communities to hire their own independent teachers would cease, the Carnegie Group instituted the concept of teacher certification. So this is fucking Carnegie, right? No wonder you got all these fucking JCPS teachers defending fucking Carnegie. This says that Carnegie was the one that brought about teacher certification. And what is teacher certification? Are they fucking a fascist, right? Are they blindly obedient fascist bitches, right? And if you're blindly obedient, then you'll be a fascist just like them, right? No one knew that the communist revolutions were funded from the United States. The buildup of the Soviet Union as well as that of Nazi Germany would also be funded later from the United States in order to get a reactionary public to bend to the will of controlling political factions. It was a plan that worked well in the 1920s and worked well again in the 1950s in the psychological creation of the Cold War, providing funding for the buildup of the military, industrial, and pharmaceutical complex. The non-thinking American public never suspected a thing. Such a thing would be unbelievable. Because the United States was owned by wealthy businessmen, a synthetic free enterprise system was created and antitrust laws were passed to prevent anyone else from gaining power. Everything that had already been consolidated was grandfathered out of the law. It was a brilliant scheme and it worked very well. That is actually fascinating. So they said they created a synthetic free enterprise system and then antitrust laws passed afterwards, right? So grandfathered in. If you already got a monopoly, you can keep your monopoly. And actually they used some of the Sherman antitrust laws to stop the fucking unions. They said that the unions were a monopoly. Earlier in the century, there were school boards in every town. Between 1932 and 1960, the number of school boards dropped from 140,000 to 30,000. Today, there are about 15,000, all controlled by extensions of the Carnegie-Rockefeller Educational Complex. In 1959, with the advent of Sputnik, the public realization that another country was ahead of us, the embarrassed educational system was forced to temporarily create a synthetic focus on science, which produced a generation of scientists and technicians in order to resolve the apparent deficit in the public mind. In retrospect, the 1889, the U.S. Commissioner of Education assured a prominent railroad man, Collis Huntington, when he protested that the schools seemed to be over-educating, producing too many engineers and people who could think, that schools had been scientifically designed not to over-educate. It was a reference to the German system of education inculcated into the United States between 1806 and 1819. Wow, so that's actually fascinating. Okay, so they're sitting there saying that we're over-educating, that there's too many engineers, too many scientists, and we need more fucking obedient, soldiers and workers. Which I think is the exact opposite. I think we need more leaders. We need to invest in technology. We need to encourage people to be the best that they can be, right? And it is true, you can't have like an oversight. You can't have like 4 billion fucking architects. One architect can really, I see lots of cookie cutter fucking houses. So really, most people don't even use an architect. But I can see one architect really doing a number. Can create a model house or model this or that. I like falling water. So that would be fun. So Prussia and the legacy of the 1806 Battle of Jena. I've already gone over this, but I'm going to go over it a little bit more because this gives a different perspective of the same fucking, ideas that I'm talking about. So, a generation earlier, a previous enlightened despot, Frederick the Great, had led a Prussian army and conquered and unified a number of the independent German states under the flag of a Greater Prussia. After the French Revolution deposed the French king and set up the first republic on the continent of Europe, that Greater Prussia, led by Frederick's successor, had joined with the other major monarchies of Europe to wage war on the new republican menace that France posed to the political status quo of Europe. In 1806, an army of the Republic of France, led by Napoleon, marched into Prussia in a preemptive strike to protect the fledgling nation from one of its powerful monarchist adversaries. The armies met outside the town of Jena in the German state of Saxony. So they're in Saxony. That's where they fought, in the town of Jena. The brilliant battlefield improvisations of Napoleon, along with the superior training and morale of the French citizen soldiers, contributed to a decisive defeat and destruction of Prussia's highly trained professional mercenary army, and led to the subjugation of Prussia under French control for the next 6 years. It was not lost on the losers that their professional army was defeated by a force made up of inspired volunteers. So you have Prussia, who's getting paid, and they had money, right? These are the fucking Hessians, and these are the fucking, the future Nazis. They're professional, who's getting paid, and yet here the volunteers of fucking Napoleon's army defeated them. So how did the inspired volunteers beat a professional army, right? The defeat shook the entire Prussian aristocracy, and they committed themselves to literally retool their entire country to ensure that it would never happen again. Two key players in that retooling effort were influential German philosopher Johann Fichte and his star protege, the young Friedrich Hegel. Here's Gatto on Fichte's framing of his country's humiliating loss and what needed to be done in terms of lessons learned. The most important immediate reaction to Jena was an immortal speech, the addresses to the German nation by the philosopher Fichte, one of the influential documents of modern history leading directly to the first workable compulsion schools in the West. In no uncertain terms, Fichte told Prussia the party was over. Children would have to be disciplined through a new form of universal conditioning. They could no longer be trusted to their parents. Fichte said that education should provide the means to destroy free will. Look what Napoleon had done by banishing sentiment in the interest of nationalism. So, because we're French, that's why you will subordinate yourself and spread, French culture with the bayonet. Through forced schooling, everyone would learn that work makes free, and working for the state, even laying down one's life to its commands, was the greatest freedom of all. Here in the genius of semantic redefinition lay the power to cloud men's minds, a power later packaged and sold by public relations pioneer Edward Bernays and Ivy Lee in the seed time of American forced schooling. So there it is, right? Through forced schooling, everyone would learn that work makes free, and working for the state, even laying down one's life to its commands, was the greatest freedom of all. So that's Johann Fichte, right? They lost the fucking battle, so let's raise German nationalism. How are we going to raise German nationalism? Well, you put German in the fucking schools, right? German, German, German. Everything German is good. Teach all the kids Germans and put all the kids together, and then have them, be together, and maybe they'll find the ones that they'll want to love later on, and create more Germans. And you have to indoctrinate them. That's what they're trying to say. You have to make them Germans. You have to make them think a certain way, have a certain type of ethics, maybe, some type of Christianity. It doesn't have to be Catholic. It could be Protestant, but definitely Christianity. And so they created a fucking specific German, person. And how did they get that German person? They educated them, and they put them through schools. According to Barzone, the young Hegel had an epiphany on the path forward for Prussia and Western culture generally, and the lessons learned from Napoleon and the debacle at Jena. Periodically, a mere man comes to look superhuman. He is able to change the face of society when all previous efforts have met unshakable resistance. Hegel was well placed for making this portrait from life. He was in a cellar in Jena while Napoleon was fighting to victory above ground. For the majority of thinkers and artists, Napoleon, remained the genius in whom they recognized and celebrated not themselves as individuals, but their drive to achievement. Here was no ordinary conqueror for booty, but a man who fashioned a new Europe, the areas of influence, the efficiency of his administration, his code of laws, his active role in art and sciences, lapidary judgments of men in society, even his ambitious, ruthless, but lofty, bespoke the heroic character. Wow, so Napoleon is just so wonderful and great. Because he wasn't just a bloody dictator, he was bringing all this new shit, right? He was a fucking republic. He turned the republic into a monarchy. And so when you saw that the republic could be a monarchy and have a fucking leader, then why do we need monarchies? Why are we allowing these fucking hereditary fucking kingships dictate over us when we can decide for ourselves who we want our leaders to be? So, Prussia develops the 19th century state-of-the-art education system. Hegel became the leading figure of a budding young German intelligentsia who championed the role of the enlightened despot intelligently and deftly, right? Hegel championed the role of the enlightened despot, intelligently and deftly directing the resources of a large modern state. According to Gatto and seconded by Barzun, that vision inspired the Prussian education revolution that followed, which included a complete transformation, instituting the first mandatory universal schooling in the Western world. It was a three-tiered system built around the privilege of the Prussian aristocracy, but also leveraging the modern concept of meritocracy, at least to the degree that it supported the aristocratic hierarchy. The jewel in the crown was the new University of Berlin, perhaps the first modern university in the world. So, University of Berlin is the first modern university in the world. The top tier of their equivalent of the modern K through 12 system. Remember, the Germans invented the K part, right? They invented the whole fucking part, right? Not just the kindergarten, but our name, right? The name kindergarten is a German word, means garden for children. There are private schools reserved for the children of the aristocracy. Prussia's 1% at the top. 0.5% of the students attended Academia Schulen, right? So the academy. So the 1% was part of the academy. And then part of the 5% was part of the real school. And then the 94% was the Volksschule. And the Volks is just to make them, you know, all German. The people. Volks is just the regular people. So the 0.5%, these people are going to be as future policy makers. They learn to think strategically, contextually, in wholes. They learned complex processes, useful knowledge, studied history, wrote copiously, argued often, read deeply, and mastered task of command. Which is what future leaders, captains of industry, those who want to succeed and do well should be studying, right? So if you're a poor fucking family, you shouldn't be beating the shit out of your kid, telling them to fucking, you know, do as the fuck as they're told. You should be having them engage in these types of conversations. I heard the Kennedys would have like really good political arguments around the dinner table. That's fucking genius. That's exactly what the fuck I want, to have arguments, you know, around, you know, the culture of us as political and talking about making each other sharper and better. And that's how we learn, is by knocking each other's ideas down and then coming up either stronger before in our own ideas or, you know, convinced of other people's thoughts. So the academy is going to create the fucking future owners of America. The remaining two tiers were government run, all about ranking and sorting the rest of Prussia's youth so they could best play the needed roles in the nation's apparatus. Tier 2 was for the best of the rest. So the number 1 was the aristocracy. They're going to rule over everything no matter what the fuck happens. Number 5, the 5%, 4 to 5%, actually it says 5 to 7%. They are going to be the best of the rest. So you want the best doctors, best lawyers, best scientists, right, out there. So they're talking about the professional proletariat of engineers, architects, doctors, lawyers, career civil servants, so government workers, right, and such other assistants as policy thinkers at times would require. From 5 to 7.5% of all students attended these real schools, learning in a superficial fashion how to think in context, but mostly learning how to manage materials, men, and situations to be problem solvers. This group would also staff the various police and functions of the state, bringing order to the domain. And this is the group of people, if you can make happy, then they might be able to make the entire fucking apparatus happy. They might make them subordinate, right? The 94%. I keep thinking the great Russian word apparat, let's see it, apparat, ratchet, ratik, chit, tick, for people who hold key positions with the bureaucratic or political apparatus that runs an organization or country. A group between 92 and 94% of the population attended the People's School, Volksschulen, the People's School, where they learned obedience, cooperation, and correct attitudes, along with rudiments of literacy and official state myths of history. So the state is the best, Kentucky's the best, America is the best. Be obedient, listen to your parents, listen to your teacher, listen to the police. Correct attitudes, you be a Christian, Jesus is your savior. The rudiments of literacy, here's a little bit of stuff. Read a little bit, but don't read too much, or we'll start burning these goddamn books. In Gatto's provocative summary, these Prussian educational visionaries held a clear idea of what centralized schooling should deliver. 1. Obedient soldiers to the army, obedient workers for mines, factories, and farms, well-subordinated civil servants trained in their function, well-subordinated clerks for industry, citizens who thought alike on most issues, national uniformity in thought, word, and deed. Gatto, page 131. The most academically inclined of the privileged aristocrats and the best of the commoners attended the flagship of the new system, University of Berlin, where Hegel was the anchor of the philosophy department. James Billington captured the revolutionary spirit of this institution of higher learning in his book, Fire in the Minds of Men, Origins of the Revolutionary Faith. The new university at Berlin was the intellectual heart of the Prussian revival after Prussia's humiliation by Napoleon. Hegel was central to its intellectual life, not only as professor of philosophy from 1818 until his death in 1831, but for many years thereafter. Founded in 1809, the University of Berlin was in many ways the first modern university, urban, research-oriented, state-sponsored, state-supported, free from traditional religious controls. Berlin stood at the apex of the entire state educational system of reform Prussia, deliberately located in the capital rather than in the traditional sleepy provincial town. The University of Berlin breathed an atmosphere of political expectation and intellectual innovation among both its uncharacteristically young professors, mostly in their 30s, and its gifted students. Berlin was built on a solid German tradition that had already extended and modernized the university ideal. Thus, the hopes of all Prussia were focused on the new university at Berlin, the first to be built around the library and laboratory rather than the catechistic classroom. The university offered inner students. Okay. So the Prussian system comes to America. What's it look like here? So there's 3 tiers here. They're saying tier 1 would be elite private prep schools and elite private top public universities that, although not completely limited to our society's social elite, are generally bastions of the most privileged in our country, including many of our top political leadership. Tier 2 would be the best of our public K through 12 schools located mostly in more prosperous neighborhoods, which had the resources to assist the most academically inclined of the children of the middle class to put them on the program path to get their degrees and get good jobs as doctors, lawyers, and other knowledge workers or contemporary apparatchiks. Tier 3 would be the rest of the public schools, mainly in the inner cities, poor rural areas, generally under-resourced and failing by design, as it is argued by some, though there are the occasional exceptions of schools or individual students that rise above these circumstances into the second tier, which perpetuate the myth that anyone can succeed. Many of our youth in these schools have the odds of success heavily stacked against them. From these ranks, many of our lower paid worker bees come, including many of the enlisted soldiers of a volunteer army. And further, our own modern university system was patterned after the research-oriented government-supported system created by the Prussians. Gatto's take: throughout 19th century Prussia, its new form of education seemed to make that warlike nation prosper materially and militarily, while German science, philosophy, and military success seduced the world. Thousands of prominent young Americans made the pilgrimage to Germany to study in its network of research universities, places where teaching and learning were always subordinate to investigations done on behalf of business and the state. Returning home with the coveted German PhD, those so degreed, became university presidents and department heads, took over private industrial research bureaus, government offices, and the administrative professions. Back to our narrative, Prussia had a great influence on the educational system in America. Here's Barzan's take on that influence. The American intellectual class that did exist in the 1830s looked less and less to England and France for ideas. It was Germany that fed them. Chief among American Germanists was Professor George Ticknor of Harvard. He, George Bancroft, later the first national historian, and a few others had gone to German universities and carried home the message of Herder and Goethe, Kant and Schiller in all of its poetic and philosophical strength. Ticknor in turn imparted to its young Emerson and his classmates. So one of those contemporaries of Emerson was fellow Unitarian Horace Mann, who visited Prussia in 1843 with the intent of studying their schools and bringing the best of their state-of-the-art education system back to America. I go into Mann in the context of Massachusetts in the 1830s in detail in my previous piece, The Myth of the Common School. He, of course, championed and launched the first universal compulsory state-run education system in America. Again, a key point here is that prior to that launch, as I mentioned before, education is mostly a local and or personal matter, informally pursued through self-learning apprenticeships or teachers accepting students for classes or tutoring. For us today, 5 to 7 generations into the ubiquitous state-run K through 12 public schools in every neighborhood, it's hard for us to even imagine a world where education was personal or local rather than the business of the state. It was Horace Mann and his like-minded comrades in the Massachusetts elite who imagined education as a tool of the emerging republic to develop its human resources and direct that development. They saw themselves as the best and the brightest, so who better than they to say what education should be for everybody else? In Bob Peppermint Taylor's book, Horace Mann's Troubling Legacy, he talks about how Mann tied the fate of democracy to the fate of the common school. Common schools derive their value from the fact that they are an instrument more extensively applicable to the whole mass of the children than any other instrument ever yet devised. They are an instrument by which the good men in society can send redeeming influences to those children who suffer under the calamity of vicious parentage and evil domestic associations. They are the only civil institution capable of extending its beneficent arms to embrace and to cultivate in all parts of its nature every child that comes into the world. Nor can it be forgotten that there is no other instrumentality, nor can do so much to inspire that universal reverence for knowledge which incites to its acquisition. Though the Prussians saw their new state-run education system as a tool of their totalitarian state, Horace Mann and other American leaders who were enamored with that system believed a state-controlled education system could be a similarly effective tool to forge a budding republic that was a melting pot for a diverse population of immigrants. Building to his discussion of the Prussian schools in the 7th annual report, Horace Mann is careful to acknowledge that regardless of the strength of their educational program, schools in Prussia were employed in the service of an authoritarian state. His claim, however, is such schools would be all the more appropriate in a free democratic society. He is also careful to praise our own tradition of common schools and to emphasize their egalitarian structure. Massachusetts has the honor of establishing the first system of free schools in the world. Our system, too, is one and the same for both rich and poor. For as all human beings, in regard to their natural rights, stand upon a footing of equality before God, so in this respect the human has been copied from the divine plan of government by placing all citizens of the same footing of equality before the law of the land. Alright, so we got an idea, right? So Napoleon, Prussia, the Battle of Jena, Austerlitz. Everybody's scared that Russia's going down, or Germany's going down, so they got to get all smart and fucking do shit different. The battle was a big fucking, it was just embarrassing, right? They had been so fucking powerful, and then all of a sudden they weren't powerful at all. The devastating defeat by Napoleon at Jena triggered the so-called Prussian reform movement, a transformation which replaced cabinet rule by appointees of the national leader with rule by permanent civil servants and permanent government bureaus. Ask yourself which form of governance responds better to public opinion and realize what a radical chapter in European affairs was opened. The familiar three-tier system of education emerged in the Napoleonic era. One private tier, two government ones. At the top, 1/2 of 1% of the students attended the Akademien Schulen, whereas future policy makers, they learned to think strategically, contextually, in wholes. They learned complex processes. useful knowledge, studied history, wrote copiously, argued often, read deeply, and mastered levels of command. So even if this is all repeat, it's good to know this stuff, because the top 1% is going to be your aristocracy. That's going to be your slave owners. It's going to be the 1%. It's the people that own every fucking thing, and they manipulate and keep everything for them fucking selves. So the next level is going to be the best of the best. There's 2 government schools. So you got the academy, right? It's going to educate all these fucking rich people's kids, so that way they'll know what the fuck is up, right? They'll be trained in the classics, and they'll be talking about really deep and fascinating ideas, and discussing really fucking good ideas, and coming up with new shit, right? So they always stay 1 foot in front of the game, and maybe come up with the next best thing, right? But the real school and the Volk school, this is your kind of your high school and your elementary schools. These are designed to make the German people obedient. So the next level, real schooling, was intended mostly as a manufactory for the professional proletariat of engineers, architects, doctors, lawyers, career civil servants. So your bureaucracy, administrators, those people by the judge, right, that's filling and typing shit out. Other assistants as policy thinkers at times would require from 5 to 7.5% of all students attended these real schools, learning in a superficial fashion how to think in context, but mostly learning how to manage materials, men, and situations to be problem solvers. This group would also staff the various policing functions of the state, bringing order to the domain. Finally, at the bottom of the pile, a group between 92 to 94% of the population attended people's schools, where they learned obedience, cooperation, and correct attitudes, along with the rudiments of literacy and official state myths of history. The universal system of compulsory schooling was up and running by 1819, right? So that's when the Prussian model, they always saw 1818, 1819, and then it comes to America, either Horace Mann in 1843, or he comes back in 1852 and gets it installed. So 1852 is actually when the Prussian industrial model comes to America and it's installed. Now Pestalozzi, I've read a little bit about Pestalozzi. So from its inception, Volksschule, the people's place, heavily discounted reading. Reading produced dissatisfaction, it was thought. The Bell School remedy was called for. The standard of virtual illiteracy, formerly taught under state church auspices. Reading offered too many windows onto better lives, too much familiarity with better ways of thinking. It was a gift unwise to share with those permanently consigned to low station. This is fascinating. This is exactly the reason why they didn't want Frederick Douglass to read, because if you try to, you give a nigger an inch, he'll take it if you give a nigger, what is that? The quote was like, if you give him an L, if you give him a nigger an L, he'll take it a mile or some shit. But the idea is if you give him a little, then he'll take it forever. So you don't want them to learn to read, because once they learn to read, then they can read to learn, and then they can learn for themselves. Also, they'll learn about freedom, and they try to be like a sort of parental or paternalism, paternalistic, saying, well, we're protecting the slaves, because if they become educated and realize that there's better life out there for them, they'll always be dissatisfied and sad. But if we kept them dumb, then they'll just be dumb, happy slaves, just like we like them, right? So they're doing the same thing with the Volksschule for the people's school. So for the general people's school, they just want to make them fucking, dumb enough to be able to they don't want them to take over the fucking thing, but they want them to be able to operate and not do dumb shit, so they can be able to, use a hammer and shoot a gun when it comes time to fire the weapon, but they don't want them to actually come up with the battle tactics or to start their own businesses. So that's the people's school. That's the Volksschule, right? Henrik Pestalozzi, an odd Swiss-German school reformer, was producing at this time a non-literary experience-based pedagogy strong in music and industrial arts, which was attracting much favorable attention in Prussia. Here seemed a way to keep the poor happy without arousing in them hopes of dramatically changing the social order. Pestalozzi claimed ability to mold the poor to accept all the efforts peculiar to their class. He offered them love in place of ambition. By employing psychological means in the training of the young, class warfare might be avoided. So fuck Pestalozzi. Well, I didn't realize that was the fucking point of Pestalozzi. So for the poor just to become comfortable in their fucking poordom. A curiously prophetic note for the future development of scientific school teaching was that Pestalozzi himself could barely read. Not that he was a dummy, Those talents simply weren't important in his work. He reckoned his own semi-literacy an advantage in dealing with children destined not to find employment requiring much verbal fluency. 17 agents of the Prussian government acted as Pestalozzi's assistants in Switzerland, bringing insights about the Swiss style of schooling home to northern Germany. While Pestalozzi's raggedy schools lurched clumsily from year to year, nobleman von Fellenberg refined and systemized the Swiss reformers' disorderly notes, hammering the funky ensemble to clarify plans for a worldwide system of industrial education for the masses. So here comes the industrialized education. Pestalozzi starts out. Now we got von Fellenberg. As early as 1808, this non-academic formulation was introduced into the United States under Joseph Neff, formerly a teacher at Pestalozzi School. Neff, with important Quaker patronage, became the principal schoolmaster for Robert Owen's pioneer and work utopia in New Harmony, Indiana. Neff's efforts there provided high-powered controversial fodder to the fashionable Unitarian drawing rooms of Boston in the decades before compulsory legislation was passed, and when it did pass, all credit for the political victory belonged to those Unitarians. Neff's influence resonated across the United States after the collapse of New Harmony through lectures given by Robert Owen's son, later a congressman, then referee of J.P. Morgan's legal contretemps with the U.S. Army, and through speeches and intrigues by that magnificent 19th century female dynamo Scotty Jimmigree Fanny Wright, who demanded the end. Okay, goddamn. So the Prussian industrial model, right? I think we're gonna get back. We're gonna come back to this. I'm kind of sick of reading, and there's a lot of good stuff here, so I don't want to miss out on any of it. Our schools are, in a sense, factories in which the raw products children are to be shaped and fashioned into products that meet the various demands of life. Building upon the depersonalized uniformity and rigid hierarchy of the Prussian system, they constructed an industrial schooling model designed to produce millions of workers for America's factories. Believing that most of America's students were destined for a life of menial industrial labor, these theorists created a multi-track educational system meant to sort students from an early age. While the best and brightest were carefully groomed for leadership positions, the majority was relegated to a monotonous education of the rote learning and task completion. Consequently, our schooling system is still locked into the Prussian industrial framework of fear, isolation, and monotony for both students and teachers. Procedure is emphasized over innovation, uniformity over individual expression, and control over empowerment. Abso-fucking-lutely right. It is therefore not surprising that the majority of America's classrooms have changed little in over 100 years. For more information on the Prussian industrial model, see our working paper. So, let's see. What year did they say a year when he come? No. But it does mention Horace Mann, and it also mentions Frederick the Great. The creative system of engineers solidifies control, focusing on following directions. Basic schools of conformity sought to indoctrinate the nation from an early age. So they're saying that Frederick the Great started the fucking obedience, you know, and then I guess they just carried it on with Fichte. And we're going to find out what the results of the Prussian system was, and lots more from this NevadaJournal.com coming up soon. It's all about the Prussian industrial fucking education model. I know you guys are excited about this shit. We're going to find out where the system of education in America came from. We're finding this shit out. Isn't this exciting?